Hi there, and welcome to the latest episode of Off the Data Provided, an interpersonal communication podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Dr. Marcus C. Shepard. On today's episode, we're going to first talk about a recent episode of NPR's It's Been a Minute, which focuses on the men's loneliness epidemic. Through my discussion of the NPR episode, I will weave in some interesting data from the Pew study on men, women, and social connections that the episode focuses on. Additionally, we will talk about the friendship formula and the life cycle of friendships. Through our explorations, we will touch on key concepts such as toxic masculinity, low-maintenance friendships, emotional well-being, investment, emotional closeness, trust, support, nascent friendships, relationship rules, deterioration, friends of the heart, as well as friends of the road. Of course, at the end of the episode, we will have Ask Dr. Shepard, where we'll delve into someone seeking new friends in a new city. Of course, if you'd like to submit your own Ask Dr. Shepard, please feel free to email me at offthedataprovided@gmail.com. So if you delve into the NPR episode entitled The Men's Loneliness Epidemic Might Not Exist, I actually think the title is a misnomer. And the reason is the episode, as well as the actual Pew data, highlights several gendered implications and differences regarding men's loneliness and women's loneliness. Essentially, the data from Pew Research argues that men don't necessarily report loneliness at a higher rate than women. There's really a 1% difference, men at 16% and women at 15%. But if we delve further into the details, men made up nearly 80% of the suicides in 2022. Men also expected more benefits from romantic relationships and were more motivated to seek them out compared to women. So the Pew data shows that men on a whole are less likely, additionally, to reach out to people for emotional support as compared to women. So clearly, even though men and women are feeling lonely at similar rates, how they go about engaging and dealing with this loneliness is different. Men, due to what I would argue is toxic masculinity, and we know that toxic masculinity is a set of attitudes or ways of behaving that are stereotypically associated with the expectations of what a man should be. And these, unfortunately, have negative impacts on the men themselves and society as a whole. So men are expected to act a certain way, to do certain things, and because of this, they are maybe finding themselves lonelier than women. So the Pew data show that men as a whole, right, are less likely to reach out for emotional support as compared to women, as we discussed. So they're sitting in their loneliness more. And other data shows that 15% of men say that they have no close friends, none at all. Also, the emotional quality of the friendships that they do have aren't great. They get emotional support from friends about half as much as women do, and they say I love you half as much as well. So clearly, we can see that these gender differences are occurring. So while the title says, or maybe placates that it might not exist, we can see that there are actual genuine differences occurring. We also know from interpersonal communication research that women have more one-on-one intimate relationships where they gather and they literally just talk, where a lot of male friendships are designed to do things side by side. So playing games, watching games, going to the bar to watch sporting events, going to sporting events, being in a pickup league. It's all about doing things and not necessarily connecting on that emotional closeness level. And we'll talk about that a little later when it comes to the friendship formula. So men, of course, have been socialized to reach out potentially less to individuals and more so go to groups of men. And this becomes harder to maintain if you have to always get a group together to hang out than it is to contact someone one-on-one. What I do and will like to say here, especially, is what's interesting is while there is a focus in the Pew Research, especially when it comes to age, when it comes to race, when it comes to education, when it comes to income, and of course, these gender differences, there isn't so much taken into account when it comes to the understanding of sexuality and how that implicates here in potentially the loneliness epidemic. I'd be interested to see a study done from them, and I'm sure there maybe are studies slowly coming out around queer friendships, because we know that being queer, identifying as queer, you live life differently. So one of my besties, Kira, and I, we always joke about how we're both queer and we do life differently. For me, right, my friends are a priority, as I've discussed before. And that's not necessarily the same thing that, of course, men have been socialized through toxic masculinity for. Their priority is finding a romantic partner who we know will then, quote unquote, help take care of them. And so if dating is down, as we know from different information and data that is being shared and gathered, we know therefore loneliness has to be up, especially for men, because their primary source of connection usually stems from that romantic partner. A premium is put on finding that person because they will be your quote unquote savior in a sense. And one of the guests on the NPR podcast episode mentioned, quote unquote, I think for men that there's this idea that kind of goes unspoken where it's like when you have a spouse, that spouse will kind of take care of a lot of the life things for you that are not making money. Like my dad, for example, rarely made social plans. My mom made all of those social plans. Like, I think your life kind of becomes very narrow. You have like work and then your spouse and your family. And there's really not much of like an outlet for more than that. And this to me highlights and underscores that how when men get into these committed romantic relationships, a lot of the socializing is placed on the back of the partner that they are with. They also highlight in the NPR episode how some men were talking about their quote unquote male friends or just their friends in general stem from who their girlfriend or their spouse's close friends are, their husbands or their partners as well. And sometimes they don't vibe together. They don't speak the same language. One person in particular talked about they're not into sports, but all the other men are. And so there's this barrier for them because a lot of male friendships, as has been explored in a lot of interpersonal communication research, are very much around doing things and not necessarily getting to know and having those deep, vulnerable conversations. So we know that men, again, are socialized to value these romantic relationships above everything else, where women, it's way more acceptable to grow up valuing friendships. We see it in media, as the NPR episode references, where you have television shows. They reference, in particular, Sex and the City and Girls. But of course, I would argue you have other things such as Insecure. Of course, we also have Living Single, which many say inspired girls and definitely inspired friends, where these are very close, tight-knit groups of women. And in Living Single, you saw friendships of men as well. One of the people argues that an issue we're seeing in society is outside of the buddy kind of comedies that we see in movies, there really are no mediated examples of just man-to-man friendships that are out there as much as women. You can hit on a bunch of shows, you can look at a bunch of movies that are women having fun, but outside of those kind of the Hangover movies, outside of buddy cop movies, you don't really see just regular male friendships, which I think actually is a good point that the article makes. Additionally, the article talks about this concept of low maintenance friendship. And so low maintenance friendships are friendships where people feel as if they don't require a lot of work. And we see this concept from time to time where people talk about, well, friendships shouldn't be work, or even just any relationship shouldn't be work. And that's not true, right? It shouldn't necessarily be hard work, but it still takes an effort. So you still have to show up. You still have to make plans. You still have to invest. And we'll talk about that friendship formula. And that friendship formula that we'll get to after we finish engaging in this article really highlights and underscores all of the effort it takes to maintain an interpersonal platonic relationship. So if you feel as if you're in a low maintenance friendship, the reality probably is the other person is doing the majority of the work. So I know, for instance, I've lost some friends along the way due to the fact that I was the one always reaching out. I was the one always making the plan. And I know that clearly I have more time on my hands due to my chosen career path where it's easier for me to make plans. But you want to feel like someone's in it with you. That, sure, maybe they don't have the time to make the plans, but they are going to be active in helping plan, or they're going to definitely show up and be readily available. You don't want to feel like you're doing all of the work in any interpersonal relationship. So we clearly know from the Pew data as well that emotional well-being is linked with education, income, and marital status. So emotional well-being is essentially the ability to maintain emotions effectively, experience a sense of meaning and purpose, and maintaining supportive relationships, ultimately contributing to your own overall positive mental health. So when I go back to my career choice, clearly I have a PhD, a terminal degree, so I have a high educational status. Income, if I look at the data out there, allegedly I'm in the top 2% of people in my education, racial, gender, age bracket, right? Who knows if that's really true? Marital status, clearly I'm not married. But the Pew argues that adults with some college or less education, those with lower incomes, and those who are not married are among those most likely to say they feel lonely, all or most of the time. So these groups are also among the least likely to say they feel optimistic about their life. Clearly, I have high education, allegedly high income, but I don't feel it. And I feel emotionally fulfilled. I have great friendships. I literally just celebrated a birthday. I saw friends throughout my whole birthday weekend. I do a birthday month. I'll still be celebrating towards the end of this month when friends are coming in for pen relays. I have a very fulfilled life. I also queer my life where friendships are central. Romantic relationships are not central for me. Clearly, if I have one, it is a priority, but it is not the priority, as mediated examples as toxic masculinity has pushed for so many men, that their goal is to find a partner, right? Whether gay, straight, queer, bi, pan, whatever. It's pushed that you find that partner, that's who you are with, and you nest, and then your friendships kind of fall apart, especially for men. That is not my case, and honestly, that's not the case for people who I've cultivated in my life who have maintained, right? I've had friends who get in relationships and they disappear, and when that happens, usually our friendship is over, because I make it clear that while it is going to be less likely that we have as much time for one another as you have a romantic relationship, we shouldn't go from, let's say, 80 to 0. There's a balance to be found. I know my bestie Kiara, for instance, has been in several significant long-term relationships through the duration of our friendship, and our communication has never fallen off. There was even a point in our friendships when we both were in grad school, right? Shout out to Dr. Singleton, right? We're both PhDs now, but where we talked on the phone literally every day. And she was in a committed romantic relationship, and yet she still had the time to talk to me daily, to text me daily. Now, of course, maybe not everybody has that flexibility or ability to do that depending on their life demands. And we'll talk about potential issues that arise in friendships and why they deteriorate. But we made it a priority to stay in contact. And even now, I probably don't go more than 72 hours without hearing from her, whether it's a text, a phone call, a social media, something. And 72 is probably being generous. It's probably closer to 36. And then I have other friends where we check in maybe once or twice a month, but we are doing that work. Additionally, what Pew argues is that adults younger than 50 are more likely than those over 50 to say that they are extremely or likely to turn to a mental health professional for emotional support. So I think this is something positive that we're seeing, right? So 24% versus 14%. Clearly, these numbers are a little low, but people who are less than 50 are more likely to turn to a mental health professional. And actually, when you break it down by race, People who identify as Black, 26%. People who identify as Hispanic, 25%. People who identify as white, 16%, and people who identify as Asian, 17%. So Black and Hispanic individuals are more likely to seek mental health professionals. What also was interesting from the Pew data research was that 2/3 of Americans say that all female societal groups have a positive impact on women's well-being. And this is higher than the share that say all male groups have a positive impact on men's well-being. That's only 56%. And Americans are also more likely to say women-only groups have a positive impact on society overall at 57% versus the same about all male groups, 43%. So as I said, I'd be interested in seeing a little more of a breakdown when it comes to sexuality for these things, because we do know that unfortunately, when it comes to toxic masculinity, friendships, being vulnerable are seen as quote unquote feminine traits. Seeking validation, emotional support, right? Those are seen as quote unquote weak attributes. But hopefully we're slowly but surely seeing a shift, as we can see with this Pew data, where more people are willing to seek out mental health professionals for emotional support. So maybe there'll be a changing tide, but we can see that due to the lack of opportunities for men, right? They need more structured opportunities potentially as adults to form these friendships, since they've been socialized to form friendships via group activities, so adult sporting leagues, for instance, and maybe just seeing more mediated examples to see that it's possible, to see that it's not a problem, to push back against that generalized other, aka society, who has told you this is how you should act. And that's part of quote unquote doing the work, as they say, is really figuring out these scripts that you've been taught and seeing if they're serving you or not. And I think, unfortunately, with a lot of men, especially in today's society, a lot of these scripts that I would label toxic masculinity scripts do not serve you and clearly don't serve society. This data shows that men sit in their loneliness more. Men are less likely to reach out. Men want to socialize more so in groups where they do things and not necessarily talk, where we know that women haven't socialized where we just get together and we talk. A famous or easy example to think about is women watching TV shows together. So we have a TV night. I remember back when I was an undergrad, right? Grey's Anatomy Thursdays was so big for a lot of women in college, and they would all get together and watch together, and then they would talk about what they watched and talk about their feelings and talk about what's going on in their life. Or book clubs, where, yeah, some of it's about talking about the book, but it's kind of an excuse to get together and talk about your lives as well. And men, unfortunately, don't seem to be doing that at the same rates as women. So, of course, that then brings us to delving into more of the communication of the friendship formula and life cycle of friendships. So, what I think about that's so fascinating about friendship and why I love researching and talking about it is that when compared to other relationships, friendships are unique because there are honestly no rules, no institutions or laws that are created to maintain them. If we think about other interpersonal relationships, you think about your family, there's the Department of Child Protective Services. If you think about marriage, if you think about, committed romantic relationships, there are institutions like marriage. There are laws on the book about what you can and cannot do. But when it comes to friendships, what really is there? It's individual. And what we do, especially as children, and hopefully as we mature, we break out of this, is we kind of have these bare rules or set standards that everyone must fit in between. You have to do A, you have to do B, you have to do C. So a perfect example of this comes to communication. So if you're someone that wants to be my friend, let's say I haven't evolved and have a high cognitive complexity or person-centeredness, terms we've talked about before and terms we'll revisit throughout the podcast. But essentially those terms are about being able to understand that people are unique individuals and will require different communication styles to have the best interaction with them. So if I didn't have that, I would have the same standards for every friend. And I don't have that. So as I said before, Kira and I talk almost every day. If not every day, every other day. My friend Darius, my bestie Darius, right? We talk almost every day, and we can talk for 3-4 hours a day. My best friend Janine, we check in maybe every 2 to 3 weeks, and we'll have a good hour, 2-hour conversation. And then, of course, my other best friend Zamir, we will talk maybe once a month and intermittently social media. But that talk will be about 2 hours. And then lastly, Jaime, or my primo, Jaime, right? I don't necessarily think of him even as a friend, I just think of him as family. We talk maybe once every other month, and we'll talk for about 2 hours. Those are different expectations when it comes to communication. But I've matured to realize that different relationships are going to require different things. And so that comes to that formula. So first and foremost in the friendship formula is the idea of investment. So investment is you expect usually a reciprocal investment of time, feelings, energy, and thoughts in our friendships. So that ROI, right, that return on investment. And so clearly at the beginning of a friendship, you're going to hopefully be putting a lot in, and you're never going to see that quote unquote return on investment, that ROI, unless you stick with that friendship. So what happens a lot of times is you meet somebody, maybe in a friendship group, you hit it off and you try and start to invest. And if you stop investing, you both stop investing, then nothing really happens. You have to engage with your own time, which I think is always the most valuable resource because you can't get it back. You have to invest your feelings, your energies, and your thoughts. So through this investment, you will get emotional closeness. And so this is usually through dialogue and self-disclosure or shared activities. So we know from different interpersonal communication research that men usually form emotional closeness through these shared activities, through going to the bar to watch games, to maybe going to a concert, through maybe playing basketball on the weekends or going to the gym together. And so during these activities, maybe they'll slowly let it slip about some things, but usually it's more so about the actual activity. Where we know women more so, it's through dialogue and self-disclosure. Oh, come over, let's sit on the porch, have some tea and catch up. It's about the actual act of just talking and sharing your life. And of course, these gender differences, I think, become problematic as we expand and we understand that there are different axes, right? That intersectionality. So I know for me, for instance, a lot of my close friends, or honestly, all the close friends that I've already mentioned, we bond through self-disclosure. There are some shared activities that we do, but literally we will get on the phone call, we'll talk, we'll open up. And that's literally how our friendships have always been. Clearly, I'm a male, so I'm not necessarily ascribing to the shared activities as how I form friendships. But I do know some of my other friends, or I won't mention names of them because I didn't get clearance, but I know one of them has moved to a new city and is doing different shared activities to slowly start building friendships in their area. And I think that's a great way to do it, right? You're stepping outside of a role. Maybe you met at a conference, maybe you work at the same job, and then you're inviting them to step out of that role and do something different. And then from that, hopefully you step out a little more and you start building trust and support. So of course, investment is one part of the formula, emotional closeness is the other, and then you have trust. So this is not betraying the confidence and doing what you say you'll do. So if we say we're going to hang out on a Friday night at 8 o'clock, you show up Friday night, 8 o'clock. You're a person of your word. We also know that support is going to be very important. So this is both verbal and nonverbal. So you can verbally show support through dialogue, while nonverbal is displaying it through action and or just maybe rubbing somebody's back, giving them, a thumbs up. These things matter and are super important to forming friendships. And so when we think about forming friendships, it brings us to the life cycle of friendships. So friendships always begin with an initial encounter, either planned or accidental. So if you think about when you were in school, a lot of your friendships were probably accidental. Somebody you were sitting close to in class, or someone you had a lot of classes with, or someone you were put in a group with and you guys hit it off. So usually during that initial encounter, you check to see whether there's common ground, values, or interests that exist. And if those do exist, usually an invitation is shared by one or both parties to move beyond those social roles. So that social role of being a classmate, or maybe that social role of being a coworker. And so if those are reciprocated, we know that a fledgling friendship has potentially launched. So if you decide then to invest, to self-disclose your feelings, your thoughts, your values, your attitudes, and your interests, that, shifts the relationship to a nascent friendship. So nascent friendships are when you think of yourself as friends and you begin to work out your own relationship rules. So when we are in a stabilized friendship stage, usually we've determined that the relationship will continue, we take future encounters for granted, and we work to create higher levels of trust. So if I think about a lot of friendships that I have, or even newer friendships that are blossoming as I speak, they are due to the fact that we are both investing, that we're doing self-disclosure, that I trust the person. They're going to do what they say they're going to do. They're not, if I tell them something in confidence, that they're not going to tell other people, and that they support. So whether it's showing up for me, right? This was my birthday this past weekend. All of them showed up for me. Whether it's listening to this podcast, I know quite a few of them do, right? I didn't force them to, even though the podcast is designed mostly for my students. So I appreciate everybody who is listening. This is how we have built on our initial encounter and our fledgling friendship to now be more of a nascent friendship, and I consider these people part of my daily life. And so relationship rules are oftentimes unspoken understandings that regulate how people interact. So an issue here, right, if we're trying to be more ethical and effective with our communication, is that we don't make them unspoken, that we actually tease them out. And so Janine and I do a great thing where we do friendship check-ins about every 16 to 18 to maybe 24 months, where we check in and say, hey, how have I been showing up? How have I maybe not been showing up? What would you like to do more of? What do you need less of? What can we do? Because we're all evolving, we're all changing, we're all growing. And so what I needed from Janine when we first met all the way back in 2011, when I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, starting my PhD, and she was a year ahead of me, versus what Dr. Shepard needs from Dr. Anderson at times, is going to be completely different. So having these check-ins, reestablishing these rules, maybe removing rules, maybe adding rules, is a great way to help people figure out how to maintain these connections. So I'll take a perfect example with Janine and I. I remember one of our last friendship check-ins, I told her I wanted to see her more. We both live in different cities. When we both lived in LA, we saw each other basically every day, especially when I didn't have a car. She literally would pick me up every day. We would go back to her place, we would study. So I literally saw her basically 365. Then I got my own car, but we still saw each other several times a week. Then I moved away, she's moved away, and so we see each other with less frequency. But I told her, I want to see you more. I always love being in your company. And for me, she can literally just be in my house. We don't have to go anywhere. I just want to hang out with you. So I'm literally going to see her in Memphis in a few weeks. And she'll be in Philly maybe a few months after that. But what was happening was we would see each other maybe once a year or every other year. And so now we made a conscious effort where we see each other usually twice a year. I'll make a trip to see her. She'll make a trip to see me. That's part of our relationship rule, right? It's not unspoken. It's spoken. We need to physically see each other hopefully twice a year. And clearly, we need to talk on the phone with a lot more frequency. What happens, though, is a common reason for deterioration comes when relationship rules are being violated, or there's a lack of investment either from one or both of those parties. So I've had some friendships deteriorate over the years, right? Especially we're still in a pandemic, but I think COVID really highlighted for me some of the friendships and relationships I was doing the majority of the investing in. I was doing all the scaffolding. So when I pulled back, they just didn't reach back out. Okay, the friendship basically just deteriorated. So sometimes, though, deterioration also can stem from getting pulled in different directions by other friends, other family, career demands. These can all hinder friendships, and also lack of support. So sometimes when it comes to friendships, and I talk about this with my students, is sometimes we have friends for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And it doesn't mean that these people aren't meaningful. It doesn't mean that the lessons that you learned weren't important. It doesn't mean the time that you spent isn't valuable. It just means that the friendship has run its course. Not everybody is a lifetime friend. So we know the quote unquote terms interpersonal, right, are friends of the heart. So these remain close to us regardless of physical distance between us, right? So that for me is Janine, that's Kiara, that's Jaime, that's Darius, that's I'm forgetting names. Please forgive me, friends, right? But those are a lot of my friends. They're going to remain close to me regardless of physical distance. And some of these friends that I formed, we never were physically close in terms of the distance, but we created and have maintained due to technology. And I'll talk about some of that during the Ask Dr. Shepherd. But then we have friends of the road. So these change as we move along. These are people I think about, okay, I was friends with some people when I was an undergrad who I really don't talk to anymore. If we see each other at reunions, I'm sure it's cordial and cool, but neither of us have really done the level of investment. Or when I lived in LA, I had a lot of great friends there. And when I pop back to LA, right, we kind of hang out, see each other, but we haven't done that scaffolding or maintenance to maintain that friendship. So we do know that friends of a reason or season are usually friends of the road, right? They change as we move along, where friends of a lifetime remain close to us regardless of these changes in our lives. And what happens sometimes for this deterioration of friendships is sometimes it's internal tension. So relationship stressors that grow out of the individuals involved. So a common one is sexual attraction. If someone is attracted to you and you're not attracted to them in that way, that might end the friendship. I know I had one friendship that unfortunately ended, at least for a moment, because the friend shared that he had feelings for me and I didn't have those. And I said, I can't be in your friendship if I know that this is how you feel. And so we took some time apart. He no longer has those, and we have been friends ever since. We also know, for instance, that there are some external tensions. So these are relationship stressors associated with surrounding context of relationships. So geographic distance. This can clearly be mitigated through social media and through these smartphones that we have, but it can still be an issue. So I know my primo Jaime, for instance, still lives in LA. That's a 3-hour time difference. So that can be hard to maneuver sometimes. We also know that changes in our lives, so new career, family, or educational stages can be something that people are working towards. So when I left undergrad, I went straight to a PhD program. So whilst a lot of my friends were beginning careers and had a little more flexibility and free time, I didn't. And so we drifted apart. And then lastly, as we've discussed before, is sometimes there are competing demands. So when you get busy, friendships are some of the easiest relations to neglect when you have too much on your plate. Because we as a society have been taught that family and our significant others are the priority in terms of interpersonal relationships. So when things hit the fan, as they say, friends are easy to forget or, they'll forgive me. So I have a perfect example of two of the last close friendships I had to end were literally due to the fact that these friends basically went MIA and ghost because I got in significant relationships. And then when those relationships ended, as they oftentimes do, they came right back around calling as if I was just supposed to sit there and wait for them. And to me, what made this super interesting is I am someone who tries to be ethical and effective with his communication, and I let anybody know who I'm trying to form a very close friendship with that I don't tolerate being dismissed because you found a committed romantic relationship. And so if you do that to me, the friendship is over. I thought we were investing in building a close-knit interpersonal relationship that was clearly just platonic. And of course, you're not going to have as much time for me. So let's say we talked once a week or maybe every other week. Okay, maybe we talk once a month, but to go radio silent, for me to send you texts that go unresponded to, your birthday comes around, I bake you your favorite cookies, and you say you're going to come and get them, and then a month goes by, and they're just sitting in my freezer, so I start eating them, then I never hear from you. These are just signs that clearly I wasn't as important to your life as we both thought maybe. And of course, both of those people came around and apologized and said they would try and fix it or they wanted to work on it. And I just told them I wasn't really interested. And if they really wanted to, it wasn't going to be a 50-50 thing. It was going to be kind of a 60-40, more like 70-30. And I had one friend in particular tell me, oh, of course, I'll do it. Like, you're so valuable. You're so important in my life. I said, hey, take a beat. Hit me up next week after you've thought about it and let's talk some more. He said, okay, sure. Never heard from him again. Right. So we know, unfortunately, that these external tensions, these internal tensions can be things that deteriorate these friendships. So when I think about all the things that we've discussed and talked about today, right, particularly the male loneliness epidemic, it all comes down to socialization. It all comes down to these life scripts that we've inherited from prior generations, that we've inherited from the media. And it's part of your job, your quote unquote work or your homework from all the data provided to think about how you have built your life and to figure out what works for you. And most importantly, what does not work for you and how you can change that. That will be the best thing you can do for yourself. I know I started to do that in my mid-20s, kind of right after I graduated from my PhD program. And I really want to figure out, well, what do I want my life to look like? And how do I want to set that up? And I've moved forward with that, right? Next year will mark 10 years of being Dr. Shepherd. Woo! And I can't believe that. But I've lived and I've tried to practice what I preach. And so I would hope that for those listening, that you take a step back. And if you don't have close friendships, well, figure out why. Are you not investing? Are you not sharing that emotional closeness? Are you not offering trust? Are you not offering support? You can't just take. You also have to give. And it's going to be work. Every relationship is work. And when people hear that, they roll their eyes. But it's true. Every interpersonal relationship is going to require work. Most of the time, that work is not going to feel like it's quote unquote work. It's not going to be tedious, but there are going to be times where it is. So there have been times where I'm not really feeling it, but I know I need to show up for my friend in this moment because that's what they require. And there are also times maybe where I really don't feel as if I can show up. And because we built that emotional closeness, that trust, and that support, I've told my friends, I know you really need me for X, Y, and Z right now, right on the phone, but I'm shot, right? Like I'm brain dead, essentially, in the sense of the day has drained me. Can we pick this up tomorrow? Like I promise, I just want to be actively listening. I want to be there for you. And I don't want to not show up as my best self. And if you've done the work, a lot of people, I've actually never experienced anybody who's been upset at me for that, right? They understand, maybe they're a little bummed out, but then the next time when they're talking, usually after that discussion, they're like, oh my God, no, you know what? Thank you, right? I really needed to hear exactly what you said. And I said, great. I probably wasn't going to be able to provide that for you yesterday or whenever we last connected. So do the work. It's worth it. And friends are so invaluable. They're so important. And as someone who's moved to Philadelphia and knew no one and now has a thriving social circle, right? I celebrated my birthday with a lot of people and will continue to. It's worth doing the work. So that, of course, brings us to Ask Dr. Shepherd for this week and relates to friendships. So the Ask Dr. Shepherd is from Tyrone, and he says, hi, Dr. Shepherd. My name is Tyrone, and I recently moved to Chicago for a new job. I was hesitant to take the job because I know no one in the city, but it was a great opportunity, and the salary increase was something I couldn't ignore. With that said, I've found my time here so far to be quite lonely as I do not have any friends here, and while I socialize a bit with people from work, I know I should have a life outside of work. How would you go about trying to make friends in a new city? I think this is an excellent question and something I have firsthand knowledge in, having moved to Philly with no friends, also having moved to Los Angeles with no friends for my PhD program. And what I did, especially with Philly, I think I'll focus on because that's the most recent move that I did, was I really utilized social media and these dating apps as a way to make friends. So now you can use, I think, Bumble and say you're just looking for friends. But way back in the Stone Ages when I moved here, right, I downloaded Tinder and I literally said, I'm just looking for friends. I'm new here. I want to meet people. And I have friends that I met on Tinder still to this day. I literally celebrated my birthday with one of them this past Sunday. So This is going to be important. Utilize social media. I have a newer friend who moved here. I know he's listening to the podcast, so shout out to you, sir. And literally, we had never met. He was moving here or had a job interview. We hung out, super cool. We stayed in touch. He got the job. He was coming back to look at places. And I said, why don't you stay with me? He stayed with me for about 5 days. We hit it off even more, had great self-disclosure. And now I see him about every week or so. So I think utilizing, if you're on social media, seeing who's in your network who lives in that area and maybe reaching out saying, hey, do you want to do something? Maybe grab a drink, go to a movie, hang out. The weather's getting nicer. I used to live in Chicago, well, Evanston, but Chicagoland. And the summer is the best thing. There's always 101 things going on, free museum exhibits. So reach out to these people in maybe your social media network and see if they know anyone, or even the friends that you do have, if they know people, to see if they can maybe link y'all. Additionally, as I said before, use some of these social networks that are designed maybe for romantic and clearly just state that you're just looking for friends and see what you find there. You'll be surprised. Additionally, a lot of people are lonely, it seems, or a lot of people lack a lot of human interaction and connection. We're seeing that through the Pew Research. We're seeing that online. We're seeing this where people kind of are talking to complete strangers because they don't have anyone. So I don't think you're alone in this. And I think you can find some great connections out there. Chicago's a great city, has a lot of great people, very friendly. I spent some time in the Midwest. Midwest people are very friendly. I remember being in Chicago when I first kind of moved there looking confused and random people just coming up to me like, hey, do you need help? Where are you trying to go? There are great people out in that city, and just in cities in general. You just have to go out and find them. Of course, the traditional going to bars or going to social events, some of these bigger cities will literally have events that are designed to get adults together. Oftentimes they're romantic, but more and more they're platonic. I know a friend went to one in DC. It was kind of like a brotherhood event, which was designed for Black men just to meet and hang out just on platonic level. So see what your city has to offer. You have to put yourself out there, of course, right? There's that level of investment of your time that's going to be super important. And you also want to make sure that those people are hopefully investing as well. It can be very difficult at first. I remember my first few months in Philadelphia were a little lonely and isolating because I didn't really have friends here. But once you hit a rhythm, once you hit a routine, it's easy to build that in. So I know I like to go to the movies. It takes nothing for me to text mass my friends, hey, I'm going to go to this movie. Anybody interested? And usually somebody is, or multiple people are, and we literally have a movie night, or we just had a game night. These things, clearly, as we talked, men do things together in groups. And, in that group, you can pull people aside and get to know them a little more one-on-one, and then create moments. When you're in that moment, plan for the next event. That's super easy. You're in each other's face. Pull out your phones, pull out the calendar and say, okay, when can we hang out? It's going to take a lot of that conscious effort at first until it just becomes your rhyme and routine. So that's what I would say for you, Tyrone. As always, thank you all for listening to our latest episode of Off the Data Provided. Please feel free to email me at offthedataprovided@gmail.com if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and hope to hear you on the next one. Bye.